Okay, welcome back to FTAG Journal. This is F554, self-administration of medication. Setup is going to be the same with the table of contents. It's going to be a brief overview, citation history, interpretive guidelines, what the surveyors are going to look for, what questions they're going to ask, some actual citations cited across the country, and then a wrap-up, just a summary. Okay, brief overview. This is a safety-based FTAG. Really, they want to make sure that any residents that are self-administering medications want to make sure it's a safe process, and there's a decision-making process from the interdisciplinary team in place to make sure that unsafe residents are not allowed to self-administer medications. So they want to see how approval is granted. They want not only to see whether it was granted or not, but they want to see the process. They want to see the decision making. Then they want to see the monitoring to make sure, as residents, they have a change of status or a change of condition. They want to make sure that the facility and the staff are monitoring to make sure that there is continued safety with the residents that are self-administering their medications. And they want to see reevaluation. They want to make sure, again, it's kind of the same along the lines of monitoring. Reevaluation just wants to make sure that it's periodically reviewed and they're still safe to take their own medications. So a little citation history. In 2018, F554 was the 61st ranked citation given. Nationally, there were 456 citations of F554 given. In 2019, stayed pretty stable, dropped to 62. Looked like there was about 17 more citations given. And as far as whether it was an annual survey or a complaint survey, almost 94% were from annual surveys, so not a whole lot of complaint surveys result in an F554 citation. So scope and severity, overwhelming majority is D level citation, nothing above an E. As far as the national distribution, a couple states kind of jump out at me, and one is Massachusetts with 25 citations. Also up there, Minnesota with 51. Kind of surprises me. But we'll look at the percentage of F554s per facility in the next slide. And let's see. The least cited states, there was actually 5 states with no F554s. Ohio, New York, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, and Kansas all had below 0.6%. The most cited, Alaska, Nevada, Montana, Minnesota, and Washington. Again, Alaska has 18 facilities, so if just a couple facilities get the citation, you're going to have a very high number. So let's get into the interpretive guidelines. The main point of F554 is that the resident has a right to self-administer medications if the interdisciplinary team determines it is clinically appropriate. So remember, F550 all the way through F556 is all the category of resident rights. So all these that we're doing the first couple months is all going to be just on resident rights. So what does the interdisciplinary team need to look at before either denying or giving approval to a resident to self-administer medications? Well, one, they need to look at the type of medication. So let's say insulin or Coumadin that have a much higher risk of having adverse effects, or if there was incorrect dosage, have a lot more serious consequences than, say, Senna or something like that. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. Next thing that needs to be considered is their ability to swallow on their own, as well as their manual dexterity in order to open up the pill bottles or pop them out of the bubble packs, Basically just being able to manipulate the packaging and access the pills and make sure that they actually are able to swallow them. Next is their cognition. Obviously, they need to be alert and oriented, and they need to be able to identify the medication. So they need to know what the medications are, what they're taken for, what the diagnoses are for them, and how often they take them and what dosages. Just mention that one. So they need to be aware of timing and the dosages of the medications. Other things they need to be aware of is they need to be aware of the potential side effects or adverse effects of those medications and what to do, how to report it to the staff if they're experiencing any of those side effects. And they also need to be aware of what a refusal is. So if they don't take their medications on time, it's technically a refusal, and they need to also report that to the facility staff as well. And then the last thing that needs to be considered is security and storage. So is the resident able to put them in a locked drawer, locked box, whatever, a bedside nightstand that has a lock on it? That all needs to be provided for, and the resident needs to be able to actually keep them in. And as you go through the actual citations later in the slides, you'll actually see that quite a few citations are given because medications and even supplements are just left out on the bedside table or at their bedside. So whether it's an approval or denial, it still has to be documented in the care plan, and it also has to be periodically reviewed. So even if they're denied, resident right, if they wish to have medication self-administered, they need to go back. Maybe their condition, cognitive status has changed. The facility needs to go back and review and see if they could actually start self-administering medications. Maybe they had a stroke and they didn't have the manual dexterity, or they had some swallowing problems, and over time, a period of a month or 6 weeks or something, all of that approved, but they're still going to be in the facility a little bit longer. The staff needs to review that and see if they can begin a self-admin program. If the resident is not able to self-administer, the facility should still encourage the resident to participate in their own medication to the fullest extent possible. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if the resident can't keep their medications at the bedside and take their own pills, they should be able to come to the cart at a set time, ask for the particular medications, and be able to take them, swallow them with as little assistance as possible. Basically, it's promoting autonomy, it's promoting independence to the fullest extent possible, because the facility has denied the resident who wished to self-administer their medications. They denied the resident that ability to do so. And another note, when a resident makes a medication error on the self-administration program, those errors are not counted towards the facility's medication error rate. So I'll mention that a little bit more in detail when we talk about some of the cross-tagging potentials. So what are the surveyors going to look for? Well, pretty much the things that we just went over. They're going to find a way to determine that. So the first thing that they're going to look at is there a process for determining if a resident can or cannot participate in a self-administration program? And they're going to figure out, well, how does the interdisciplinary team determine safety? And I mentioned before, self-administration med errors do not count the error rate. They put that in the section with the surveyors and the interpretive guidelines to remind them that it does not count. They're going to find out if a resident asked to participate in the self-administration program, did they receive a response, or were they just ignored? If they did receive a response, was that request honored? Those are along the same lines. Those two questions are along the same lines, but both were included in interpretive guidelines. And if the interdisciplinary team was not involved in the decision to allow a resident to self-administer medications, then you're going to get cited for F554. So what are some cross-tagging potentials? Well, the biggest cross-tagging potential is going to be with F557, which is under the comprehensive care plans. So again, a lot of this has to do with documentation. If they're on a self-administration program, obviously that needs to be a care plan, but also if they request it and they're denied, that needs to be included in the care plan as well. But there is a mention in the interpretive guidelines, and certainly it won't stop the surveyor from possibly trying to cite this, but it does say in there that if there are medication errors from a resident who is on the self-administration program, that they do not cite F579, which is a medication error rate above 5%, and they do not cite F760, which is significant med errors. Okay, let's go through some actual citations. And as I mentioned before, nothing goes above the E level scope and severity. And as we go through these, you should be able to kind of see a pattern of how these citations are actually written. There's not a whole lot written that is actually directly related to what the interpretive guidelines say, approval and denial and all that stuff. You'll kind of see what I'm talking about as we go through this. So the first one is a resident had ointment applied to their peri area without a physician order. Eye drops are stored in a resident's room. There was no assessment done on whether or not they could self-administer eye drops. There was Tums at bedside. Again, no assessment done on whether the resident could administer their own Tums. Resident turned on the nebulizer machine by themselves. The licensed nurse went in there, put the nebulizer solution into the machine, and left it for the resident to do it at their own convenience. Medication cup with 2 pills was left at bedside, and the surveyor determined that the pills were left there from the night before's med pass, so the resident never took them. Alzheimer's on patient accessed and ate barrier cream. When I read through this, I was like, wow, well, that really should have been maybe a harm tag. In some states, that definitely would be a harm tag. Washington State, that would definitely be a harm tag. But as I read through it, I mean, when they say they ate barrier cream, it's not like a full meal. They just got a little bit of it in their mouth. But then nevertheless, I mean, that does warrant a citation. Facility got lucky. It wasn't worse. Resident left cart to take pills unobserved. So the resident came up to the cart, got the pills from the nurse, and wheeled themselves or walked themselves away and took them unobserved. Nasal spray and cancer medications, 12 which were valued at $1,200 a month, were left at bedside. Obviously, the $1,200 a month is the cancer meds and not $1,200 nasal spray. Self-administration of eye drops and no physician order. B12 was left at the bedside with no physician order to self-administer. Menthol patch at bedside. Nurse left slow pill taker, leaving her unobserved. Again, so under this surveyor's eyes, if you give a resident their pills and don't actually watch them take them all, then you are allowing them to self-administer medications. That's kind of the fine line that needs to be walked. Resident turned on nebulizer machine by themselves, so that was somewhat similar to the one I mentioned before. Resident self-administered medication and insulin while they were on therapeutic leave without an assessment or a physician order. So they left for a few days, and the facility gave them all their medications without an assessment and without a physician order. Gave insulin pen injection to themselves with the nurse watching, but there was no physician order for the resident to give themselves the injection, to self-administer the injection. The resident self-administered crushed meds through their feeding tube, and there was no physician order. Inhaler kept at bedside, no order. CalMag bottle in nightstand with no physician order. No reevaluation of self-medication program approval after a resident had a change of condition, went to the ER, and certainly had a change of status. The resident self-administered non-prescription eye drops. Next page, still all D levels until the last three. Bottle of wound cleaner at bedside. Nebulizer solution was set up for the resident to do at the resident's own convenience. Inhaler was self-administered. Resident stated she took it often. Self-administered inhaler, not able to follow manufacturer's instructions. So those two were actually part of the same citation. Resident checked their own blood sugar with their own glucometer, and there was no physician order. Topical ointment was left at bedside. Resident was on self-administration program, but the medications were not secured in locked storage. Resident took meds to appointment without physician orders or an assessment that they could take the medications on their own. Nurse left 3 pills in a cup in front of the resident who was sitting at a dining room table. The resident self-administered saline drops. Resident did not like staff watching her take pills, so nurse, I'm sure, was attempting to be courteous, left the resident with the pills to take them unobserved. Anesthetic gel at bedside. Medicated mouthwash at bedside. Artificial tears at bedside. All these are without a physician order. Antifungal powder on windowsill. Antifungal cream in open drawer at bedside. Senna left in cup at dining room table. Resident with order for self-administration of nasal spray, but there was no MAR or TAR tracking that the resident was actually taking the nasal spray. Resident had their own eye drops in a dress pocket, and there was no physician order. Resident, even cough drops will get you cited. So cough drops at bedside, at least by this surveyor. Cough drops at bedside and no physician order. So we got a few more just E-level citations here. Essential oils were left at bedside. Papaya capsules left at bedside. Vapor rub at bedside. Plant enzymes at bedside. Baking soda at bedside. Glucose tabs at bedside. Hydrochloric acid and biofreeze at bedside. Hydrochloric acid being digestive enzyme, helps with digesting proteins. And the last one, which I think is pretty ridiculous. The order was for artificial tears, eye drops, but the resident had a different brand, and the brand was refreshed. So pretty much the exact same thing. Maybe there's a small percentage difference in the ingredients, but artificial tears, over the counter, just like refresh brand, and they still got the citation. So that is pretty much it. There's a few notes I want to make about the just in the summary. One, just knowing that I've had some residents that were on a self-administration program. The nurses found it very difficult to monitor, especially when they've got 30 long-term care residents that they got to do a med pass to. As far as what is considered a medication or what qualifies to need approval, it appears that any product with the label "keep out of the reach of children" needs self-administration approval. But I mean, as you've seen, even stuff like saline, which is quite innocuous in terms of it causing any medical issues unless you have specific conditions. I mean, it's pretty much anything that the resident would take. It's going to be considered a medication that needs approval. Supplements, vitamins, minerals are all considered medications. And overwhelmingly, most of the citations that are given for F554 are supplements that are given without the physician order, or there's anything kept at the bedside. It's not, whether or not a resident could safely take the medications or anything like that. It's just stuff left at the bedside without a physician's order, or it was accessible to the other residents, or accessible to a demented resident, as we saw with that one in the dementia unit where the Alzheimer's patient ate the barrier cream.